Arizona, as we knew it, was far different than even our history books could tell us, different than our state's founders would have ever have guessed. A barren and tortuous place, it held little promise and almost no purchase. Yet for man being what he is, this was enough to draw him into the desert now called Arizona. In this presentation, we will discuss mankind's impact on his living spaces and Tombstone, the town too tough to die. Even the mighty forces of nature have had quite a time here in southwestern America. This shot of the river coursing through our state's canyon was not born in a year or even hundreds. It was that slowly and violently upon thousands of years. When you compare that with our time here on Earth, according to science or faith, either one can show you how much force we have to apply when compared to Mother Nature. And yet, even in the face of environmental adversity and a world that never stops moving, we humans have always had our plans, our sets of numbers, and big ideas. Before Tombstone was officially federal, the people were already making huge strides toward modernizing themselves in the face of all the problems one would expect in the Southwest. Food and water shortage, theft and vandalism, and general lawlessness, kept only in check by the desire for wealth and riches. Tombstone is a historic city in Cochise County in what was then called the Arizona Territory. Founded in 1879 by a man named Ed Shefflin in what was then Pima County, the town prospered from 1877 to 1890, during which time the town's mines produced over $85 million in silver, equivalent to over $500 million today. Its population grew from 100 to around 14,000 in 7 years. The boom can be attributed to man's desire for riches, open territory claims, and lawlessness. There were several hundred mining claims near Tombstone, although the most productive were immediately south of the town. These included the Contention, Grand Central, Lucky Cuss, Emerald, Silver Thread, and the Tough Nut Mine. Due to the lack of readily available water near the town, mills were built along the San Pedro River about 9 miles away, leading to the establishment of several more small mill towns. There are widely varying estimates of the gold and silver value mined during the course of Tombstone's history. Mining was an easy task, although a very unsafe one at Tombstone in the early days, ore being rich and close to the surface. One man could pull out silver ore equal to what 3 men produced elsewhere. The downside to this was of course exploitation and bad profit sharing by the rich in the know. There were many issues of false claims, something the lawyers actually helped perpetuate. Capital venturists from the northeastern United States bought many of the leading mining operations. The mining was carried out by immigrants, chiefly from Ireland and Germany. The mines and stamping mills ran 3 shifts. Miners were paid union wages of $4 a day, working 6 10-hour shifts per week, producing about $175,000 a week. Now you can see some evidence of the huge gap in commission of profits. With gambling, liquor, and prostitutes close by 24/7, most of these unmarried, uneducated workers gave back the majority of their earnings to the men that they worked for. Despite its riches early on, Tombstone was known as one of the most deadly places in the West, whether it was gunfights and stabbings, mining deaths, drought, or even man burning himself down in his rush to the top. Due to poor building practices and fire protection common in Boontown construction, Tombstone was hit by 2 major fires. In June 1881, the first fire destroyed almost 70 businesses making up the eastern half of the business district. The fire began when a lit cigar blew up a barrel of whiskey in a saloon. A year later, another more destructive fire started in a laundry on 5th Street. It destroyed the Grand Hotel before it jumped, destroying more than 100 businesses, leaving many dead and the entire business district destroyed. Lacking enough water to put out the flames, the buildings on the fire's path were destroyed to deny the fuel fire. Total damages were estimated to be almost triple the insurance coverage for the town, but building started again right away. The most productive of the mines, the Tough Nut Mine, first experienced seepage in 1880. In March 81, the neighboring mine struck water at 520 feet. 1 year later, in March 1882, miners in a new shaft of the Grand Central Mine hit water at 620 feet. The flow wasn't large enough at first to stop work, but more experienced miners thought the flow would increase, and it did. Soon constant pumping was insufficient. The silver deposits they sought were underwater. 4 years later, the Grand Central hoist pumping plant burned. The fire was so intense that the metal components of the pump melted and warped. The headworks of the main mine shaft were also destroyed. Shortly afterwards, the price of silver slid down to 90 cents an ounce, an all-time low. The mines that remained operational barely did, and many people began to leave Tombstone. The price of silver briefly recovered, but the town of Tombstone never did, as greed had already begun to eat its fill. Arizona, and Tombstone in particular, are known for being iconic locations of the Old West for many reasons. Cowboys were the working men that provided the steady background to keep the economy moving at very uncertain times. In fact, Arizona had more cattle than people until about 1950. The cowboy of the early 1900s earned $10 a week. That's about $225 in today. Ranching took off in Tombstone after 1880. There were 12,000 cattle in the country that year, and by 1891, over 120,000. Boom and bust cycles followed, later created by overgrazing and droughts. And what would the Wild West be without some of the famous criminal outlaws and the brave men who chased them, like the Arizona Rangers? The Arizona Rangers were formed in 1901 specifically to stop cattle thieves. Unlike local sheriffs, the Rangers could cross the county lines. They didn't have jurisdiction in Sonora, but that didn't stop them from making arrests south of the border. One of the first Rangers may have been the founder of Phoenix, Jack Swilling. After the Rangers disbanded, many of them stayed behind in law enforcement. Harold Wheeler was elected sheriff of Cochise County, where Tombstone was located. And what would any tale of Tombstone be without a recollection of the famous gunfight at the OK Corral, a 30-second gunfight between bandit cowboys and lawmen that is generally regarded as the most famous gunfight in the history of Arizona. The gunfight took place at 3 p.m. on October 26, 1881. Part of an escalating series of violent events that began with a stagecoach robbery and eventually ended in a great loss of life, with 6 men, 6 feet apart, 30 shots fired in 30 seconds. All the cowboys were killed. Both the Earp brothers wounded, along with Doc Holliday, leaving only Wyatt unharmed. This spread the news everywhere, and this marked an end to the lazy lawmen of the era, as there was no longer a way for sheriffs and marshals to stand by and take bribes while innocents died. Today, East Allen Street is the center of Tombstone's tourist attractions, featuring 3 blocks of shaded boardwalks with gift shops, eateries, and old saloons. The historic district is closed to motor traffic over from 3rd Street, but the City Park and the OK Corral are still open. The infamous Birdcage Theater is located also nearby. Additional sites of interest can be found throughout the city, even as far as Highway 80, where the Boot Hill Cemetery we just showed was found. Our growth as humans and our prowess in the realm of dominant expansion is a blade that can cut both ways. We must be ever vigilant for one side, not to outcut the other. For every single thing, every inch of progress that our connections bring us, be it from interstates or cables laid into the ground, we gain from. However, with every gain can come a loss. No matter how tough we are we destined to end up this way? Even like the town Too Tough to Die, we can now fall. Will we end up rusted and hollow, waiting to be scrapped? Tombstone, like many of the now ghost towns in Arizona, has found a second life, a second chance, as a purely tourist attraction. But the greed and ill planning that drove Tombstone apart during its heyday could easily happen anywhere in the world, as circumstance is always ripe for disaster. The burden, in my opinion, falls to man. We built it, we must sustain it, for as the earth can fix itself, man must correct it. As I stated earlier, Tombstone was born more out of man's spirit, desire, and drive than it was anything else. Here was a place where there was no one to help us or hinder us except ourselves. Initially we made a go of it, working together against all odds. But as I have detailed to you, this soon fell apart. Often in a rush we can produce leaps over bounds, and in the same rush end up flat on our faces. Humankind's attachment to its possessions, creations, and ideas is unceasing. We will often protect that which we have sacrificed anyway, even if it is to our greater detriment. As for modern Tombstone, there are almost only 1,500 people left, with an average income of $26,000, far below the national median. In 1886, this would have been a booming town, but today it stands as a grim reminder of our boundaries when wishing to participate in the trappings of a modern society. How hard have you worked in your life so far? Perhaps very hard. Looking at this picture, would you ever have imagined that it would turn into this stateful, sprawling metropolis, a hub of tourism with more growth primed, a population exploding? From our humble roots in places like Tombstone, the town too tough to die, that survived lawlessness, disease, and drought, that fought back against commerce, we've conquered many environments so many times, and is now fighting back against us through the withdrawal of support. Tombstone, Arizona, once the seat of county government, once one of the richest towns in our state, is almost dead. Could this happen where you live? Why? How? And when? Humankind is amazing, certainly, but we do not exist and cannot exist in a vacuum. We have looked at the rise and fall, the wins and losses of a town many thought was born to lose. We saw a natural occurrence of metals in the ground influence the entire country. We learned how a few brutal